What's up, guys? I'm Amelia's brother, Ben, and this last year I built a guitar from scratch, so she asked me to come tell you guys about that whole process. And so I'm not going to go super in depth because it's a lot of little steps, but I'll kind of give you guys an overview um, to give you an idea of what building an instrument takes and the time and money. You're not saving any money by building your own guitar, trust me. But it was definitely an enriching experience for me, and I definitely plan to do it again. Something you learn from your mistakes. So I've already got multiple things in my mind I will do next time. Try different woods and whatnot. So if it's something you guys maybe you play guitar or later on in life, it's something you want to get into. It's pretty cool. So anyway, here's my guitar that I built. So as you can see, it's very blue. Um, See if I can get the whole thing. Yep. So obviously, it just looks like a guitar, but uh, I picked everything I wanted in other guitars that I had or guitars that I've seen, and pick and chose like the woods that I used and the materials and the hardware to kind of do my own thing. This is kind of a classic shape, but there's nothing wrong with picking a classic shape and expounding on it, or customizing the headstock or whatever. So I guess the first thing you want to do when building or deciding an instrument is the design. So think about the shape you want. What kind of what colors do you want it to be? What shape do you want it to be? Um, and just kind of like draw it on a piece of paper or take some ideas from pictures of other guitars. And then you need to start like buying materials. So decide what kind of woods you want to use. The wood can affect the sound of the guitar, especially on an acoustic guitar, but to some degree on an electric guitar as well. So this is ash, and its ash is very pronounced for its grain pattern. So this is actually the wood grain that makes these like ridges, and I accentuated it. I'll tell you about that later. So, and then you need to figure out what kind of neck wood you want to use. So I used a maple, which is just a really good hardwood, and it can be really pretty too. Like if you get up close, you can see that's all just the natural what the wood does, called flame. And then for the fretboard, which is this top piece of wood that's glued to the maple neck, I used ebony, which is a really cool dark wood that's very hard and great for guitar fingerboards. Um, okay, so like after you get kind of the design in your head, I would print off like a plan. So I printed this on a giant piece of paper. Well, I put it on a flash drive and then took it to Staples, and they printed it on a giant piece of paper. And I made several copies because I knew I was gonna ruin some of them. So you get this kind of giant guitar shape thing, and you print it to scale, and then you use your shape. You can use programs to design your own shape and print those onto a piece of paper, and then you cut it out, and then you put it onto a piece of wood, like a piece of plywood that you don't really care about, but you want it to be like a nice flat piece of plywood. So I put this on here, glued it down, and then I cut out the rough shape on this piece of plywood. And then I took a sander and went around until I got the shape perfect. So you kind of leave a little bit on the outside, and then you take your drum sander and you clean it up until it's nice and flat and perfect all around. And then this is called a template. So your template, you really have to get your template down good, because if your template's not done well, then your guitar is not going to turn out well. So this is actually my second template, because my first one just didn't turn out very well and very good. So I threw it away, because if I'm going to be spending all this time and money, what's another few hours to put into it to make sure it's done right. So I also made a template for the neck. So same thing. I also printed that out on a piece of paper, put it on the plywood, and you'll notice here there's a center line down the middle, and on this template too, there's a center line down the middle. Your center line is one of the single most important things when you're building a guitar, because everything has to be symmetrical. If your strings are off even a little bit from that center line, then it's not going to play right. They're going to be crooked. Things just aren't going to line up well for you, and what you're going to end up with is just not a good result. Even with tons of planning and you think you're doing everything perfect, believe me, you're still going to make mistakes. So you need to try to mitigate them as much as possible by measuring like 40 times and cutting once. So once you get your templates made, that's when you're gonna, if you haven't already bought it, you need to buy your actual wood that you're gonna use for the guitar. So I bought this 2 giant pieces of ash that were about, so this is actually 2 planks of ash glued together like this, and then the shape was cut out of that. So I was lucky enough that my girlfriend's dad has tons of nice woodworking tools, and that's another thing is, if you don't have the space or the tools, you can use other people's things. Like you got to talk to some. You got to have those people in your life. Don't just go into random people's garages and start making guitars. But woodworkers in your life, maybe a parent or family member, they love teaching people, so they can teach you how to use the tools safely. Obviously, use hearing and eye protection at all possible, and really make sure you know what you're doing with the tools. Otherwise, you could hurt yourself. But once you have a grasp of how to use the tools, like a joiner to flatten out these sides of these planks before you glue them together, because you got to have 2 very flat surfaces if you want to glue them together. So anyway, yeah, so I have those 2 planks of ash, glue them together sideways, and then I have just this huge chunk of wood that's thicker than the width of this guitar, so I need to thin it down or thickness it. So I run the whole thing through a planer, get it to the thickness I want, and then that's when I use the template that I made here to cut out the shape of the guitar. So same thing as before, I use a bandsaw to cut out the rough shape, and then I put the template on, like double-sided tape to it, and I use a router table to go around the entire perimeter of this guitar with the template and a bearing guide. And a lot of this is technical terms, but this is just stuff you would learn from watching YouTube videos, which I did a lot of, or reading online. But it's just more words for tools. So you use a router guide, you cut out the shape of the guitar or whatever instrument you're doing. Yeah, and then it's still kind of rough, so you do a lot of sanding. So a lot of hours sanding, getting things smooth, and so then I'm just here with this guitar body, and imagine this neck's not even made yet, and I don't even have a pocket here, so I just have this chunk of wood that's in the shape of a guitar body. And I took the neck off one of my other guitars to kind of show you. So this is just one of my guitars that I have. So this is called the neck pocket, and it's extremely important to get your neck pocket straight and the right shape of your neck. Otherwise, the neck will be loose. You want it to be a nice tight fit. You want it to be straight and in line with that center line that we talked about. So I had that guitar body and I had no neck pocket yet, and I didn't have the neck built yet. So before I use the router to cut out this neck pocket on that body, I decided to build the neck, which is what most people do. You build the neck and then you use the shape of the neck when it's done to decide what the shape of your neck pocket is going to be. So instead of cutting out this shape and then making a neck to fit it, it makes more sense to make the neck and then cut out the shape to fit the neck. It's just, unless you're using a pre-built neck, like, that is the way to go. So I decided to build the neck. So I got the piece of maple, and I'll just grab this neck that I took off of that other guitar. So this is a production neck. So what I did was I just made that, I got this big piece of maple and I used the template for the neck to cut out the general shape. And then I got a little creative with the shape of the headstock. Just everyone kind of makes their own shape, but you can do whatever you want. And so then I have this kind of shape of a neck, but no top wood, which is this dark wood ebony. So I got the ebony wood and routed out there's like a channel that goes across the middle of the neck that has what's called a truss rod in it, which is like a piece of metal and some screws that when you tighten it, when you tighten this screw, it puts a bend in the neck, so you either have like a dip like this, or if you tighten it really tight, it'll like straighten it out. And what that does is when you're adjusting your strings, you can get either a bow in the neck, like so your strings aren't buzzing on these metal frets. I might be getting way too in depth here, but anyway, yeah, on a modern guitar you have to have a truss rod running about 3/4 the length of the neck underneath the fretboard. So on this neck, it's actually all maple. There's no top wood. So the way they get that truss rod in there is they route out a channel here and they put the truss rod in and then they plug it with this other piece of wood. So that's another way you can do it. But the way I did it was, so I just had this maple wood and this top wood wasn't put on yet. So I routed out the channel, put the truss rod in, and then I glued this top piece of wood covering that channel. Once that was done, I used the neck template to match up these sides, so this top wood was kind of sticking out over the sides, so did the same thing, made it nice and flat across the side so it would feel good in the hand and be playable. Let's see, and then once I had the neck kind of the rough shape, it wasn't rounded at all across here yet, so I used a lot of sanding, and then I also used a tool called a spoke shave, which they used to use back in the day to like make the spokes on wagon wheels. That's why it's called a spoke shave. But it's also great for carving a neck. So to get this kind of round shape, I would take that spoke shave and it would literally make giant shavings of wood across the neck. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, so lots of people do different things. Some people use angle grinders to grind away, and then they make pencil marks to see like their progress. That's one way. You could also use a router with like a round bit to kind of give you this roundish shape, and then come after it at the end with a ton of sanding. And I had to do a ton of sanding either way. And then on this this part here, you have to spend more time sanding and getting it to go into that corner where your hand is playing. And the whole time you're just feeling it with your hands and seeing how it feels. Like, oh, there's a bump there. I need to sand that down a little bit more. Which sounds really annoying and time consuming, and it is time consuming, but it's actually a very fun part of making the guitar, because the neck is what you feel the most when you play. So it was really fun to because that's the most connected you'll be with the guitar. So it was just a really fun part of making the guitar. So at that point, we've got the body built, we've got the neck built. We have the shape of the neck down here. So at that point is when we would cut out that neck pocket. And you start off a little bit smaller than you think you want to be, and then you can shave off or sand off a little bit at a time until it's a nice tight fits in there. And then what you would do is route out. So I bought these templates to route out these little holes for the pickups here and here. So these are recessed down in here, and I bought these pickups. And the pickups are what turn the string vibration into the electronic signal that goes into that leaves the guitar from here and goes to your amplifier or your computer or whatever. So pickups are super important on electric guitar. And this is called the bridge, also very important. So your distance from your bridge to what's called the nut down here is the distance the string travels and vibrates from. And as you play on each of these metal pieces called frets, you're shortening the length of the string. As I move my hand up, I'm shortening the length of the string, making the note higher. And yeah, so using that center line, you line up the bridge, and you have your neck you screw it on, you kind of have your neck bolted on, but not tight, because you're not ready to really, you're not ready to really decide where it needs to go. So you don't even have it screwed in yet. You just have your neck in the pocket, and you're deciding where to put those screw holes. You got your bridge centered and in the right position. You put your outer two strings on, and then when your outer two strings are on, you can adjust the neck this way. And when those two strings are equally distant from the outside of the fretboard is when you know your neck is straight. So when it's in that position, that's when you drill your holes and decide where your neck is going to sit exactly in that neck pocket. And the slightest change can completely change the angle of these strings and make them crooked. So this part's really important, obviously. If we look in here, take this apart real quick. So this is another area that I routed out. And by routing, I just mean use the router to cut out a big hole. Another piece of maple. So here's where most of my electronics live. So I've worked on guitars for a while, so I knew how to do this mostly, but there's plenty of diagrams online. So that actually lines up with my volume knob and my pickup selector. So if I have it in this position, it's just this pickup. The middle is both, and the bottom is just this one. And if I pull the knob up, I actually am splitting the coils. So instead of both of these, it'll be just this one. And if I have it in this one, instead of both of these, it'll be just this one. And then if I push it back, it'll be both of them together. And it just creates a different sound. So you can be as creative as you want with electronics. Another thing I want to mention is this thing is called a Shinto rasp. And rasp is just a wood tool that is used to remove a lot of wood very quickly. But this one is great for guitar building because it's very controlled. You can run it along the whatever part of guitar you're working and have a lot of control with both hands, removing a lot of wood. And I used that to make this like arm carve, which is hard to see. But if you look at the guitar, yeah, here, you can kind of see it goes off like a little ramp there. And that's just to make your arm kind of sit more comfortably when you're playing. Instead of like if it was just flat, it would be kind of a sharp digging into your arm. So I have one there. I also have a slight one on the back. So if you have a little bit of a belly, it'll feel more comfortable. And then I also went around the whole body and just made this, instead of a sharp corner, it's kind of rounded over. And I did that on both sides. And I also did it a little bit here, just to make it a little more comfortable on your hand when it comes up here. So I also used the Shinto rasp just on the neck, like for taking large pieces of wood out in a controlled way. So that's a great tool. Yeah. So at that point, I've got the neck on the body. I've got, these holes routed out for my pickups. I've got most of my hardware and electronics mounted. I take all the strings off if I had any on, but I don't have any of these metal frets. These are called frets. I don't have any of those installed yet. And in fact, I don't even have slots cut out for them or anything. So, so I just have this big piece of wood with nothing on it. If I press a string down, it's gonna make a noise, but it's not gonna sound good because fretless guitars and basses are very hard to play. You use a special ruler, or you measure specific distances from the nut. Each one is a little bit shorter from the next. So as you look down, the distance between the next one gets shorter and shorter until you get to the end, and it's a lot shorter than it was down here. And what that does is it's honestly just like shortening the string the perfect amount to where you're playing a semi-note or a semitone higher with each fret that you go up. So you can play it in standard music. So I bought the ruler that helps you measure the correct distance because it's just a little bit more reliable than measuring from the nut to each different spot, because if you get off a little bit, it could throw it off. So I was pretty happy with that. Let's see. Yeah, like I was saying, like the frets let you go up one note at a time. And if you've played stringed instruments, you know this, but for those of you who don't, and when you get to the 12th fret, you're actually playing one whole, what's called an octave higher than you are if you just play the string open. So, I'm sure Amelia can explain that better than I can. So, yeah, at this point we've got, like I said, just this empty fretboard. So I cut out all these slots with a special saw that's the right width of the frets. I cut the frets roughly to the right size, which it's just like this big long roll of fret wire, and I press them in, and I hammer them in, and I make sure they're pressed really tight. And yeah, and then I cut off the ends that stick out a little bit and sand the ends so that they're not sharp on my hand as I'm playing. And then I dress the frets, which just means make them so the guitar plays better. So you want them to be smooth on your hand, and also when you're playing, you want them all to be roughly the same height as each other, so you can level them, and then that way when you're playing here and here, one is not higher than the other because that's going to cause a lot of issues when you're playing. So I've got all the frets installed. I installed these two 12th fret markers. I just drilled out a little hole in each one and glued each of them in and then sanded them. I actually did that before I put the frets on. Oh yeah, one step I forgot to mention. This fretboard is not completely flat. It actually has a little bit of a curve to it across this way. So yeah, so it's called a radius, so like a radius of a circle. So imagine this fretboard is one, let's hold it this way, it's one giant circle that goes around here. You know, it's like a couple feet long, but you're only getting that tiny little portion of that side of the circle, but that's still a radius. So what radius you use is, it has a different feel to it. A lot of people who play really fast like a flatter radius, which would mean like a bigger circle. And a lot of people who like to play, like older guitars had more round, like more round radius, so like a smaller radius. So like a 7.5 inch radius would be a circle with a 7.5 inch radius, which would be like, I don't know, this big. But a 20-inch radius would be like, I don't know, like this big. So it would mean flatter, and they just feel different. So I played plenty of guitars. I went with a 20-inch radius, which I actually really like. At that point, I would take everything off and do my finishing process, which is making this nice blue color. I filled the grain with black grain filler to really make it pop. And then I stained it with this blue stain and sealed it with a polyurethane satin finish, which helps protect it. And the neck, I didn't do much as far as finishing. I just used a little bit of Danish oil, is what it's called, to help protect the wood. But this is pretty much just raw wood on the neck, which is a really great smooth feel. Yeah, and at that point, I would do the final tweaks to the electronics, put everything back in after staining and finishing it, because you can't do it with everything on here. And yeah, little odds and ends here and there, but that's kind of the general outline as I record this 30-minute video of how to build a guitar. Thanks.